Chapter 18, Blind Spot. Communication between allies is a necessity when working closely together. For example, when a hit is about to happen within another gang or group, depending if it's NF or BGF, the leaders of the group doing the hit will notify the leaders of their allies so that no conflict or misunderstanding occurs between the groups. With that said, I had a real good friend who I had known for about a year. His name was Paul, and he was an African American. We shared the Waypile together and talked about mutual interests. Paul was involved with Crips, a gang from Los Angeles known for violence. He'd given up the violence of that past lifestyle to better himself. He'd been approached and asked to join the BGF and politely refused. Whenever I was out on the Waypile, I always had 2 or 3 bodyguards with me, and not the Department of Corrections type. It's insurance, you see. My position as first lieutenant did have its perks, and one was protection 24/7, especially on the Waypile. That area is located within a blind spot where staff can't see what's going on. There's a lot of guys moving around and the equipment gets in the way. They just don't have a clear eye line of everything. Things can happen to a guy, bad things. One sunny afternoon, Paul was working out on the Waypile behind me. I was working out up front and talking with him and some other guys. Mostly we were hitting the iron and huffing and puffing away. One of my lieutenants came up and whispered in my ear that we had to leave the Waypile right now. The BGF had notified him that a hit was about to go down and for us to get clear out of the area. When I asked who the target was, my heart skipped for beats. It was Paul. I looked in his direction, but he was continuing his reps, not knowing what was about to happen to him. The reason for the hit, just because he wanted to do the right thing and not join another gang, do his own time, go home, a better human being, and be with his family. Once again, I was grieving. Paul didn't deserve this. It was a stupid sacrifice just because he didn't want to join a gang. Paul had found his ultimate life with God. I didn't want this to happen to him. I wanted to warn him of his impending doom, but my bodyguards were already on all sides and walking me away from that area. Interference was not an option anyway, because this was a BGF hit and nothing could be done. Paul didn't notice that the entire area had cleared out. He was enjoying his workout and had 250 pounds extended over his chest. He never saw the 50-pound dumbbell coming at his head. The BGF caved in his forehead and the iron he had extended finished the job when the bar came down on his windpipe, cutting off his air. Death was immediate. My heart goes out to his family. It took the guards 20 minutes to notice him lying there with blood dripping from his head. The alarm sounded and they finally came for him. We were on lockdown for 2 days for the investigation. 2 weeks later, the BGF leader, Romeo, and myself were called up to the administration office. We were informed that the MCU program was being shut down because they needed ESOL. They were going to convert it to a protective custody unit. The PA told us that within 3 weeks, we all would be moved to L Wing because it was smaller in size compared to ESOL. A few lucky ones would be released back to the mainline yard. The captain and the PA suggested having Romeo and I, as the leaders of the 2 main gangs on the yard, inspect L Wing before moving in. The wing had 2 floors. The first tier had a wall divider in the middle to keep the noise level down. The second tier didn't have a wall and was open with more room to move about. The wing even had its own kitchen, which was a plus, and the yard was about half the size of the East Hall yard. If we went along with the move, it would help to cut down on the population for those of us moving to L Wing. When we returned to East Hall, I talked to the regiment and notified Larry to bring him up to speed. Larry told me to go along with the program. After 2.5 weeks, we started moving to L Wing, while selected others went to the main line. When I moved, I made sure my right-hand man and Second Lieutenant Casper came with me. I trusted him with my life. He had been there for me when I needed him in the past, like on the Waypile during Paul's hit. I counted on him to be there in the future. After the move was completed, I had to start all over again, setting up lieutenants for each tier and communications. Just on those 2 tiers, I had a total of 6 lieutenants in my own regiment. Later, I got word that Larry had paroled and had gone home. We had said our goodbyes a couple of weeks earlier through the internal communication system. I had been in the hole for 7 years and wondered if my day would ever come. When you're doing time, any good news is a blessing. But most of the time, it's just about doing the time and not letting the time do you. Then, one morning, I came in from the yard and I was just getting ready to get some lunch when one of my bodyguards said I was being called to the counselor's office. I was thinking, what did I do now? With 3 bodyguards in tow, I was escorted to the counselor. I hated to have bodyguards all the time, but that's the price you pay when you're in a leadership position. The NF takes good care of their own, no matter how I felt about it. Someday, I would be thankful those bodyguards were there for me. After arriving at the door of the counselor's office, 2 of the bodyguards took off, and the last one posted up until I finished. I knocked and I was invited in. I noticed that my file was open and spread out on the desk. I waited for Mr. Kane to start talking, and when he did, I couldn't believe my ears. He asked me how I felt about going back to the main line and if I wanted to go. It was like the whole room lit up. I stammered for words. Finally, I caught my breath and a big smile appeared on my face. "When do I pack?" I replied. I couldn't believe it. Excitement didn't begin to express my elation. After all those years in the hole, I felt like a kid wanting for Christmas morning. Mr. Kane said that he was recommending me for approval to be moved to mainline at my next annual committee meeting. When committee concluded, I had been approved and I notified DR immediately of my status change. The next thing to do was to find my replacement. I had Casper in mind for this position and he was basically a shoo-in to take my place. I taught him everything I knew and had enough confidence in him that I already forwarded my recommendation to DR for approval. But things rarely go as planned, I would learn. Apple arrived in L-Wing and everything changed. The problem was that Apple had experience as a first lieutenant and he was close with DR, Mousy, and Bobble, and a few others who were in high ranks. Those guys came up at Soledad and had a bond. Me and others in the ranks had been born at DVI. Word came down from DR he had chosen Apple to take my place. We all had our choices for picks, for replacements, and you can believe that I wasn't happy with DR's decision, but it had been made. I called Casper in to tell him the news, and he wasn't happy. I assured him that when the opportunity presented itself, he'd be my first choice to call upon. Even though he was disappointed, he understood how things worked. I wasn't a fan of Apple after that, even though I knew he was capable of commanding the position. Because of his arrogant attitude and the way he carried himself, I stayed away from him as much as possible. Apple was just Apple. 24 hours later, I found myself on the main line in E-Wing. And again, when I moved, I lost my ranking and was automatically reduced to a soldier. That wouldn't last for long.